how to be a man without being toxic, right? This is a question that a lot of men are wondering at this day and age, right? Because it can be quite confusing. You know, how do I be a man? How do I be a strong man? How do I be a successful man? How do I be a great partner type of guy without being toxic? So I'm going to take you through some of the kind of toxic values, traits that show up, right? Then I'm going to talk about what do you need to do instead. Yeah. So some of these you're going to hear and you're going to be uncomfortable because they're going to be things you're doing and you might find yourself feeling internally defensive. And that's not really the point here. The point is actually to go, where do I do these things? Because a lot of these we're all doing, right? And it's not binary. It's not if you do one of these things that makes you completely toxic, right? They're just kind of things that we do and you have to like, not root them out, but, you know, start to do something different, right? So I'm going to start with dominance and control, right? This is a really big thing, right? This need to say being charged, dismissing other people's opinion, controlling all decisions. And it can be in smaller things like interrupting and speaking up over people, right? It's this way of dominating spaces constantly. And you might hear someone like Jordan Peterson say that, you know, there's always dominant people, right? There's people who are assertive, but you don't have to be dominant continuously and like belittle other people. Yeah. And often the root of this wound is where people do this is a fear of vulnerability or fear of being out of control or being weak. Another one is about emotional suppression. This is something that a lot of us men, we learn from a very young age is to suppress all emotions. We say we're fine. We have very little emotional range. We don't even know what we're feeling. But there's another side to this, which is like mocking and belittling other people's emotions. So, you know, we see this in newspapers and the media a lot where we belittle a man if we see him crying. Yeah, we're like, oh, why is he crying for? You know, or you might even do this to your child. Again, these are kind of toxic traits on the smaller end, you know, especially belittling a child and so forth. And the root of this is often the shame around emotions and feelings, right? We've been taught that emotions are weak. We've been taught this from a young age and it's hard to shift as one. It takes a lot of years of working on it and getting to like the roots and the small branches and everything. Another one is aggression and kind of explosive anger. And what I would probably also call is like uncontrollable rage, where we're very quick to rage. We'll go from like being calm and relaxed to being really angry and rageful and out of control. Shouting, threatening behavior, intimidating behavior. These are all things that we can do in relationship or with friends and even in the workplace, which are toxic, man. Like if you're threatening people, you're going to say you had a good reason, maybe, for instance, but really, do you have a good reason? Do you need to show up in that way, right? Underneath this is this like repressed hurt and a feeling of powerlessness, right? Like needing to like assert oneself. Another one is entitlement, is another toxic trait. Entitlement, you know, believing you deserve sex and attention, right? Without having to kind of earn it really, you know, or an anger at women for having standards or boundaries, right? Or the entitlement that you feel that you can just touch women and grab women because, you know, they've got little clothes on and stuff like that. These are kind of toxic traits. There's this fear around the root of this, is like deep insecurity about self, around rejection, and even this feeling of unworthiness towards women. Another toxic trait is this disdain for the feminine. You know, anything we see as feminine, sensitivity, emotions, like if you have a disdain for it, you see it as pointless and stupid and blah, 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 which usually comes from a lack of inner connection to a feminine or a wound around our mothering or the maternal line, right? Some sort of hurt we experienced. And often what we do as men is we use logic to invalidate anything that we see as feminine or emotional, right? Forgetting that really the whole life is emotional. All our choices are governed by emotions, right? No matter how logically you think you are, you're governed by feelings and emotions. Over competitiveness, like hyper competitiveness, always need to win arguments or say the last word or like struggle to celebrate other people's success, poking holes in other people when they do things. And the root of this is always self-worth. It's always this self-worth of like needing to show and perform to being good and better, right, and right. And this is something I see with a lot of men that I work with. This destroys relationships, actually. This needing to win and this needing to be right. It's anti-connection. Another is sexual objectification, right? Seeing women primarily as bodies, trophies, body parts. Yeah. So, you know, numbers. It's just like seeing women as sexual objects and not being able to really feel or tap into a larger depth. And usually what I see with men around this is that it's an inability to connect. They do this because they have an inability to connect emotionally to themselves, but also to women. And they see sex as this thing, as the only, that's all that the world is, right? It's a very simplistic way of looking at the world, right? And usually a fear of rejection mixed in there as well. I see a lot of men with fear of rejection. Avoidance of accountability, blaming others and not taking responsibility. Simple as that, right? This can be anything from always having excuses and reasons, and ghosting, for instance, is a really good one. And underneath this is the core wound here, is the belief of not good enoughness. There's something bad and wrong, and we're not good enough. And this means that, any sort of criticism comes and feels really painful and can lead to uncontrollable anger and rage as a response, because we don't want to touch that part of us. And then the last couple we're getting to before I get into what you do about these. So there's performative masculinity as well, which is, the man box rules that I often talk about. Is like overcompensating, doing the things that you think are manly, like being the way you think you need to be a man, dominating, controlling, always right, belittling other people, this kind of macho-ness that comes out in a lot of guys, right? And a lot of that, again, is insecurity, it's low self-worth, it's wanting to fit in a lot of the time. Right, when we perform this. And then the last one I have here actually is these toxic traits, is a refusal to grow and reflect. And this one's very nuanced, right? Because a lot of people will reflect up to a certain point and then they won't reflect anymore. We might reflect in work and business, but we don't want to reflect on our relational and communication behavior, for instance, right? And a lot of this, again, the core wound here is feeling not good enough, right? Fear of change and so forth. But at the core, what I see is this fear of not being good enough. So what's the problem here? What can we do, right? How can you be a man and not be toxic? So what I'm going to say is, like, masculinity isn't the problem, right? I'm not a radical feminist. Radical feminists generally believe that masculinity is toxic inherently. And I don't agree with that at all. I think masculinity can be this really beautiful force in the world, which we really need masculinity in the world for balance. But what we need a mature version of masculinity, right? So much of the things that I explained just above, right, are these immature ways of embodying masculinity, right? They are immature. They lack this kind of moving out of adolescence, this like independence, selfishness, lack of connection with the world, into this maturity where we have self-awareness, we have awareness of ourselves, how we impact the world, we have an awareness of direction and what we're feeling and the people we're leading and so forth, which we'll touch on. It's this immature masculinity is what we're trying to move through. That is the problem, immaturity, right? Whether that's masculinity or femininity, it's immaturity is the problem, right? Healthy masculinity is grounded in emotional intelligence, groundedness, integration, being able to hold boundaries, have structure, give direction, right? And be in integrity, right? And ultimately it's rooted in love. And this kind of toxic masculinity and this immature masculinity is rooted in fear, yeah? And there's a very simple way, that's the way I see it, right? Those differences there. So how do we start to come into this more healthy masculinity? Reflection, right? Reflection is like looking at ourselves, right? But not through our own mind, because I can't remember who said it, is like, you're very difficult to see yourself from your own thinking that created the self, right? That's why when we think about our own actions, we often will rationalize the reasons behind it, the good reasons behind it, why we're a good person. And this is why you need other people to reflect to you, and not people who agree with you. You need people who, to some degree, don't agree with you, right? And this is why therapists and coaching is so powerful, because you have someone who is neutral, who doesn't care if you like them or not. And they reflect back what they're hearing from you, and they will question some of your logic and the way you're thinking, the way you're acting, and your emotional reactions to things, to get you to think in ways you've never thought before, right? And this is where kind of shadow work can be really useful. We start to look at the things that we're ashamed of. We start to look at the things that we're insecure of. We start to look at the things that we've been suppressing, the pain and so forth, right? Because in my case, for example, I was suppressing this like feeling of not being good enough that had come from my childhood. And I did that by being very critical of myself, but also very critical of other people as well. Yeah. So I didn't want to touch that feeling of being good enough. So I would shirk responsibility, right? I wouldn't reflect at myself, especially in relational senses. In many ways, it looked like I was reflecting. I was doing all this self-development work, but there were some deeper reflections that I didn't allow myself to get to. And this is why this is a really nuanced conversation around being toxic and being a man, because there's many deeper layers of self-reflection that we will avoid because it's uncomfortable. Right. And sometimes that pain can be a heartbreak in childhood, a parent who was neglectful. It could be you struggled with money and, you want to have worth and value now. So you're really striving, and you walk all over people. But you're saying that's okay because that's how you get successful. Right. But that, again, is like, do you have to walk all over people to be successful? Do you have to blame a group to scapegoat them for your problem so you can be successful? Like I see a lot of kind of masculinity influences blaming women and feminism for men's struggles, when I don't necessarily think that that's the problem. Like feminism isn't perfect, and it's a very multidimensional movement, right? But at the heart of feminism is equality for all, right? Yes, there's some women inside there very angry and so forth, but are they responsible for the struggles that men have? No. Right? The system we live in is responsible for the struggles that men have, and feminism doesn't have control of the systems, right? And it's just to look at this and be like, and then taking self-responsibility, because if I'm blaming feminism, I'm not looking at myself and my own actions. If I'm saying that feminism has caused, the reduction in jobs for men, or feminism is the reason why women have really high standards. Well, the question I have to look at myself and ask is, well, why have I not got the skills to get a good job? Why did I not study hard in school, right? Or why am I not going back to school now or university or whatever it may be to get the skills? Or why am I not working really hard in this job that I'm in, or getting into a job to help me climb the ladder? Self-responsibility, right? Or if it comes down to women having high standards, who do I need to be to meet the standards of the type of woman I want to date? Yeah. If I don't meet those standards, right, as a man, then I need to work on myself. I need to do something. I don't just blame women for having high standards, right? I need to do the emotional work. I need to do the healing work and so forth. There's a self-responsibility. And obviously, like, there are also systems in play, right? Like we live in a Western society, which for a long time has kind of ignored men's struggles and just passed them off as men being lazy or toxic, right? And we're seeing now with young boys who are paying more attention. But blaming other people, even blaming the system, doesn't help us because it takes power away from us, right? So getting into our own power. So I'm going to whiz through these last ones here is like depth over dominance, right? Mature masculinity is about taking responsibility and looking to cultivate depth in ourselves. And this is why the shadow work is so important, is to start to understand the deeper aspects of ourselves, right? And it also taps into this leadership piece. A lot of the times when we look at leadership from the kind of toxic traits, it's control and dominance and kind of a zero-sum game. Like, I need to take away from you. But in this more mature way of moving as a masculine man, you see leadership as not just getting what you want, yeah, and this selfish way of being. It's like, how can I create direction and win-win for the people that I'm leading, yeah? And that takes some level of emotional intelligence and feeling the people that you're with, while also having self-awareness of yourself and how you're being perceived and where the direction you're wanting to go. And that can be hard to cultivate, right? That's the thing. Another thing I think is really important to talk about is freedom from comfort. Something we would look for, and this is where blame comes in, is we want comfort. It's comforting to blame someone else because then we're not responsible. But you want to look for discomfort over comfort, right? You want to look for discomfort over comfort because that's how we grow. That's how we become free, right? From our internal shackles, the stories and beliefs we hold about the world, right? But also free in the world around us, because if we are not shackled by what's uncomfortable, what's hard, the world is our oyster in many ways. Yeah. And then another thing I want to add in here, and this is a slightly different point, is about being a nice guy isn't the answer. Because maybe you're hearing this and be like, oh, I just need to be a nice guy and just roll over all the time. That isn't the answer. People pleasing, nice guyness, big shout out to Robert Glover, who I've had on the podcast before, is actually a form of manipulation, right? It's, if I'm nice to you, you're going to give me what I want, but I'm not going to ask for it, right? A mature man will ask for what he needs. Yeah. In relationship, instead of assuming that our partner's not going to fulfill our needs or give us what we want, the freedom we desire, whatever, is you ask for it. You say, hey, this is something I'd really love. Right. And while also being unattached to the response. Right. The immature man asks what he wants. And then when he doesn't get the response he wants, he emotionally reacts. Right? Because he lacks emotional intelligence, he lacks emotional containment, he lacks emotional maturity. Yeah? And that takes me into the next point, which is about responding versus reacting. When we reacting, there's a almost childlikeness to it, right? I've got a little boy, he's now 11 months old. He just responds to his emotions constantly, right? Sometimes he cries because something isn't the way he wants, or when he's hungry, or he sees some food he wants, he tells you he wants it now. Yeah? That's the thing of emotionally reacting constantly. It's kind of childlike. And I think what we have to realize is that the opposite of emotional reacting, which is shutting down and not expressing, is also not the answer. That's also a childish thing to do. It's just a slightly more mature child, right? Any teenager, what do? They sit, they mope around, they don't talk, right? There's a space in the middle where you respond. You can come from presence, you come from the moment and respond to what's occurring because you know what your own childhood wounds are and you're not being controlled by that and reacting to that. Yeah. I think moving on to the next point is that we have to start to redefine what winning is to some degree, right? What success is. Instead of it being dominance, control, loads of money, taking from others, belittling other people, that's not winning, right? Some of our politicians still think that's winning. Whereas I think winning is starting to shift in my world of like depth and presence and love and capacity to be there for people, like this really beautiful leadership, mature leadership. This is winning in life, right? And with those things, money, success will come, confidence will be there, and so forth. And I think the last point I'm going to say on all of this, right, about how to be a man without being toxic is understanding women and understanding the experience of a woman, while also not then viewing women as feeble and weak. Because I think it's very easy when you really dive into all the literature about rape and about oppression of women and all these things, you could be left with thinking, well, women are weak. They're like porcelain dolls. They need to be like mollycoddled. And we forget that they are equally powerful beings. And I think that's also, but while also understanding the trauma and the difficulty and the experience of being a woman, I think it's very important we learn that to be a man in this world, to be a multidimensional man, to be a valuable man, right? To be a high value man, or whatever phrase you want to use, is understanding the different experience. While also, and I'll add another point in because it's come to me, is embracing our own internal feminine. Not needing to control or dominate the feminine outside of us, right? That could be internally, like our emotional expression, our intuition, our desire for nurturing, caring, creativity, all these things that we often as men, we're told to suppress that are, feminine, they're not good, is actually allowing yourself to like engage with those things within you and also outside of you, yeah, in the diversity of life. And appreciating diversity. These are all things that kind of like feminine traits that are valuable to kind of understand and be with, and it'll be very useful for you when it comes to being a better man in this world, and being more aware, being more understanding, right? While also being assertive, going after the things you want, right? Also leading yourself into the places you want to go. We don't always have to do those things at the expense of other people, right? We really do not. So, come to an end. If you enjoyed this episode, let me know below. Tell me what you think below. If you're on YouTube or if you're in Spotify, let me know in the comments. And if there's someone that this would be good for, you feel free to send it over to them as well. And if you can, leaving a review or a like helps the podcast, man, helps other men see this, because I know this is a big question for a lot of guys out there in the world. Until next time, ciao, ciao.